Deep listening and real power. This is one of those dark little sermons of hope. We can no longer stand by as allies. We've been allies for too long. We get to sit in our armchair and say, I'm an ally. We can no longer stand by and be advocates. Oh, yeah, I support you. I advocate for that. Yeah, I like fresh water. It's a good thing. We have to become accomplices. That is that next call. How many of you have any clue what it means to be an accomplice? Sounds vaguely criminal. Might be not criminal at all. But it has to start with listening. And that was really just rung home to me so much this week that became the basis of what this is. So I'm going to talk you a little bit through listening. How many of you are familiar with the term reflective listening? Everybody who's been to some kind of seminar at some point on leadership. How many of you are familiar with the term active listening? That's the next level up, and if we're old enough, we went through reflective listening first before we went to active listening. For those who don't have that in their lexicon, it's a tool for human service professionals and anybody in leadership training, and it's one step deeper than reflective listening, because in reflective listening, you are reflecting back what the person said for comprehension, usually paraphrasing it slightly. And done well, it's very useful, and done bad, you sound like some kind of evil parrot. Active listening's goal is to keep all parties engaged in continuing the conversation. So it moves that one step beyond just, I'm understanding what you're saying, as in there's a mutuality here, and in active listening, I want to move that conversation on further. So done well, it leads to really great results in all projects. It's important, and it's a really good framework for understanding and moving things forward. And for an example, a lightweight example, it will look sort of like this. The sky looks threatening. Do you think it's going to rain? Because you've not only paraphrased, but you've added inquiry to it. That is active listening, because it is not about you as an individual, but it is about the moment of the other person. The attention goes on to the other person, and it's the beginning of the space in between. And if you want to know more about it, it's all over the net, but I always like to recommend How to Talk So Your Kids Will Listen, and Listen So Kids Will Talk. It's by Adele Faber, I don't know how you pronounce her name, F-A-B-E-R, and Mazish, M-A-Z-I-S-H. It's in every library. It's like, I don't know, umpteenth printing. It's very, very good and very accessible. The next evolution of listening we might refer to as that by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg. Anybody nod heads with that? Nonviolent communication. How many of you are familiar with nonviolent communication? Okay, so you got like some, yeah. That's that next step where you're not only listening for comprehension, and you're going for that comprehension and then continuing the conversation, but you're going to that one step deeper, which is need. And Dr. Rosenberg's work is based on listening to the need that is being expressed by the other party. And when two parties are doing that, and you're listening from my need and hearing your need and going back and forth, you can really come up and change. Great things can happen. I highly recommend it if you're not familiar with it. It's all over the web. It too is in libraries everywhere. I'm going to read from the website just so that we have that. Quote, most of us have been educated from birth to compete, judge, demand, and diagnose, to think and communicate in terms of what is right and wrong with people. Does that hit anybody home? We express our feelings in terms of what another person has done to us. He, she. We struggle to understand what we want or need in a moment and how to effectively ask for what we want without using unhealthy demands, threats, or coercion. It's an internal struggle. How do I get my fill in the blank to do blank? At best, thinking and communicating this way can create misunderstanding and frustration, or simply keep us from getting what we want. It can also keep us from fulfilling the relationships we deserve. And still worse, it can lead to anger, depression, and even emotional or physical violence. End quote. And I would say all too often, as we witness all around our world, it leads to both emotional and physical violence. One of the quotes of Dr. Rosenberg that I like a lot is, "What others do may be a stimulus of our feelings, but not the cause." Tuck that in your back pocket. What others do may stimulate our feelings, but they're not the cause of our feelings. They belong to us. So if you're not familiar with these techniques, go find them. Seek them out and practice them. It will help make our whole world a little better, a little more peaceful. It's a step towards equality. Now, the story I told you earlier that I read, Lauren Isley's story, some of you have heard the other version of it. And had there been young children, I would have flipped this. I would have told that version first. That's the version where the adult goes walking on the beach. It's a beautiful day, and they see suddenly they're surrounded by a lot of sea stars, all over starfish. And there's one little child who's picking up a starfish and kissing it and flinging it into the surf. And then picking up another one and kissing it and flinging it into the surf. And the adult, sometimes it's a man, sometimes it's an old man, sometimes it's a woman, says, "What are you doing? It can't possibly matter. Look at all these fish. Look at it. It can't possibly make a difference." And the little person picks it up and looks them straight in the eye and says, "Matters to this one." And flings it into the surf. Because it does. But when we go back to the original text, what we discover is it's really not about the starfish at all, is it? At all. It's about someone who is lost and dying and in need of salvation. And their salvation comes. And it comes by listening. Looking and listening. Listening, making the conscious choice to look into the boiling pot, listening to the roar of the waves, listening and looking and seeing the rainbow, and seeking it out, and then having a conversation. And listening in that conversation. No, I'm not a collector. Clearly lost. Listening. It's that space of deep listening that I really want to go to today. And I have to tell you, that clock over there, I can't see because it's been moved from there, so we may very well run over. Okay, I was listening to This American Life on the radio several days ago, and I was really plunged into an abyss. And I'm going to warn you, this may be trigger warnings for some of you, and I understand. Do know that I hold you all gently and with love. It was called The Anatomy of Doubt. Did anybody hear it? It focused on the story of Marie. It's the story how she was not believed despite a preponderance of evidence, physical evidence. It's on This American Life. You can listen to it. It's also a much longer article by Ken Armstrong, T&T, Christian Miller, and that was published in the Marshall Project, and I urge you to read it. Here's a really short recap. Young girl out of the foster system, turns 18, is raped in her own apartment. her very first apartment. There's a preponderance of physical evidence, and not only is she not believed, she ends up being charged with false reporting, taking a plea deal, gets sentenced, spends some time in jail, has a record. And everyone who heard Marie's story at that time held power. Power that they were unaware of, power that destroyed Marie's life for a while. 2.5 years later, in another state, the rapist, after raping 5 more women, was caught. Marie's record has been expunged, and she's been given $500 for court costs.
Wow.
Deep breath. Listen. Several weeks ago, I was steeped in research about agnotology. Some of you may remember that sermon. Some of you may have just like, oh, what? Too much head stuff, Lizzie. Right. But this is the deeper side of it. This is how we see what confirms what we already believe. It's what we hear, what we expect to hear. It's how these beliefs are shaped and manipulated, and how incredibly corrupt our police and legal system is by this. Not that they are, but by this act of inability to listen. They have been corrupted. And that seems like the obvious takeaway from this story, right? We have our villains, except we are those villains. The deeper takeaway from this story is that the way we listen corrupts our daily lives in each and every moment. This myopia robs us of very real power that is between us to create a holy world. Marie's ordeal and victimization hinges on the fact that the 2 women closest to this young woman, her foster mom and former foster mom, did not believe her story. And why didn't they believe it? A, it did not match the emotional response they themselves would have had. It didn't match how they felt they would have behaved under that kind of trauma. And B, it didn't match what they had expected her response would have really been under that kind of trauma. And so they didn't quite believe her. They were the first gatekeepers of truth, and they shared that truth with the officer. I don't know. It doesn't quite ring quite true. I don't know. So rather just listen, they actually put into that space something that was then picked up. And then the police, rather than looking at the preponderance of evidence, looked at these 2 people who held all of the power given to it by society. Hello, foster mother. 18-year-old girl, just turned 18. Picture of what we picture. Make that story, apply it to that. No longer hear, no longer listen. Then the media comes in, and the media went wild. They had their own agenda. Then the court system and the power of truth and the power of hope was shut out of the conversation. And yet, all of the individuals who met her along the way, they failed to realize what kind of power they wielded. Each one felt that they were powerless. How many of you in this room really feel that you're terribly powerful? And really be honest. Oh, sometimes in the shower, I'm going to raise my hand. I got it really together. I'm preaching awesome sermons in my shower, right? Some of you are singing, right? But really, we walk around with this idea that we are powerless. Sometimes we just feel inconsequential. Like, this starfish, look at all these starfish. What does it matter? And sometimes, I'm just doing my job, ma'am. Just doing my job, sir. That until Detective Stacy Galbraith, 2 years later, actually 2.5 years later, she said, and I love this, She followed one rule. Quote, a lot of times people say, believe your victim, Galbraith said, but I don't think that's the right standpoint. I think it's listen to your victim, then corroborate or refute based on how things go. And that's dispassionate. Doesn't sound warm and fuzzy. But she listened. She listened to a victim and started looking at evidence. And by doing so, she was able to hear. And by doing that, she was able to create a space for other agencies to come forth. She was able to connect with another woman in another city and work together and start comparing notes and collaborate. And that enabled them to discover what had happened 2.5 years earlier in a different state to a different woman. And that's really the space I want to talk about. That space where things happen. Because this is not a self-help seminar. And this is not a leadership training. This is a sermon. And we are a church. We are a congregation of people. And the whole world is a congregation of people. And I believe that we need deep listening. I believe that we need to be accomplices to carry out a holy mission of compassion and equality. And each and every one of us can find ourselves a missionary. I heard Dr. Judy Herring talk and use the term accomplice earlier this week. She was actually talking specifically about intersex. Those individuals that come into this world for whom there is no box. There is no mailbox to check. There is no field box to check. She's a urologist and she did a beautiful, beautiful talk. Beautiful talk. But she also was speaking broadly on issues of power and who holds it. And she said, we must become accomplices for equality. Not advocates, not allies. And I sat with that word, and the more it resonated, because we have been all complicit in the inequality. Each and every person in this room, in some moment, has not been aware of the power that they held. And the only way we can is to start becoming accomplices. And the more I say the word, the more it resonates. Because all of the rest of them lack engagement. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Y'all hear this? It's a great bumper sticker. It's a meme that scrolls by my Facebook feed. It is far more than that. It is truth. If accomplice sounds criminal, then missionary sounds religious. And yeah, that's where I'm going. The job of the missionary is what?
Spread the word.
Salvation. Yeah. Old school salvation. Right. And the job of the accomplice is to facilitate the mission. And our job in this holy trade is listening, deep listening, and an understanding of power. Real power, because real power is that space in between where you show up listening. It's not about who holds power. And this is where we've got it so wrong. And if you really look at those who are really successful, real change agents, real missionaries, they know that the power is not assigned to any individual. The power is the space in between. It is how nonviolent activism works. It is how I can meet you, and right now we can say I have assigned power because I am an ordained minister. But that is not why I have assigned power. We can say you have assigned power because you're a man and I'm a woman. We can say I have assigned power because I'm older next to a child. That is society doing. But the real power comes from that moment in between. It comes from those women not realizing they had power and not really listening to Marie. And then 2 other detective women in Colorado, not Seattle, listening to a woman who was violated in her own home, who was indeed tied up. And listening and seeing the evidence and going, what else is there here? And then saying that to somebody else. And in the space of saying that to somebody else, someone else overheard it and came into that space and said, I have a friend who has a similar case in another town in Colorado. That's that space where deep listening happens, where you no longer need to have my power, where she said, I don't care what agencies I work with. She would work with the FBI, she would work with other municipals, and the other woman said, I don't care either. We have to catch this person. And in catching that person, they found an old hard drive. And on that old hard drive, somebody else said, I can break into that. It's now our evidence. And they had accounted for all of the victims on that hard drive, save for one. They didn't recognize this girl, younger than all of the other victims. And yet, what was in that picture? In that picture was her learner's permit. And on her learner's permit was her address. And they listened to the picture before them, and they found her. Because they didn't just sweep it all under the rug. That's the kind of power. That little tiny little ooh. What is that? I heard a story a while ago from a young gay man who talked about the day he did not take his life. The day he did not take his life was because of a cashier in a checkout line that had seen him and said something nice. A random event of seemingly inconsequence gave that person in that moment, oh wow, you're looking a little down. I hope you have a better day. It's lovely weather. Do you think it's going to storm? We don't know. But if we are willing to share that power and not claim it, but have it be the power in between, we will save lives. And they won't be our own. They will be everybody else's. And then everybody else will be saving our own. And the life that we are going to save is the planet. And I'm not up here being pie in the sky, because this is how it works. This is really, truly how it works. So when someone gives you a racial joke and you don't sit there and your blood is boiling and you don't know what to do, take a deep breath and say, I don't get it. Could you explain that to me? And then listen to what happens with them. And listen to what happens to you. Because that's that space where we have this incredible cone, K-O-A-N, of life, in that we are all made in the image of the divine. And we are all looking out at the divine, and we are all unique individuals, and we have to hold those two things, one God, many God. And we have to hold that space in between, because that is the space of power. That is the space that says, no, you can't do that. That is the space that you can stand together with for justice, equity, and compassion in all relations. Thank you.